data-driven guidance for your fundraising campaign. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I'm joined today by Amy Eisenstein and Stephen Shattuck of Capital Campaign Pro. Amy and Stephen were introduced to us by someone our audience is quite familiar with, Jay Love, who's a longtime friend of the Indiana University Lilly Fleming School of Philanthropy, which is home to the Fundraising School. And Jay, of course, has been on our podcasts and webinars in the past. And Amy and Stephen, thanks for being with us. First of all, Amy, what is Capital Campaign Pro?
Well, thanks for having us, Bill. Capital Campaign Pro is a support system for nonprofit leaders running capital campaigns, and we consider ourselves an alternative to traditional campaign consulting.
What does that mean? How do you provide support if you're different from a consultant?
Yeah, so there are so many things that differentiate ourselves. I would say the hallmark is our model of feasibility studies, where we teach and train nonprofit leaders to do the interviews themselves. They're in the rooms with the donors during a feasibility study process. We provide the strategy, the plan, the infrastructure, the coaching, the teaching, and they're in the room with the donors. So there's full transparency, and they're building relationships, and it's a really different model of feasibility study. That's one example of how we're different, but we are providing a full support system, we call it, of support for capital campaign leaders. That includes three pillars. One is an online toolkit of templates and samples so that they're empowered to lead their own campaigns. Number two, we provide expert advisors to provide coaching, support, guidance, strategy. And number three, we provide a group coaching environment, which is peer support. And every week, our clients get together to compare notes, to ask questions, to compare projects, to learn from each other. It's in a really amazing community we've created.
Amy, thank you for that description. And Stephen, I want to ask you, before we talk about the recent study that Capital Campaign Pro commissioned, when we talk about having the nonprofit in the room during those interviews, obviously the other perspective is if the nonprofit is not present, perhaps the folks who are interviewed will be more transparent, will be more candid, especially if they have some concerns. I'm sure you hear that all the time. How would you respond to somebody who says, is the donor really going to be forthright with me if I, the nonprofit, am sitting in the room?
For sure. That's always the number one thing. And usually our response is, you as an employee of the nonprofit, no one is better suited to engage with your major donors than you, who is at that nonprofit, right? So we sort of prioritize the relationship between the fundraiser and the major donor or the potential donor over, any concerns that, they wouldn't be transparent. And actually, it's usually the opposite, right? If there is an existing relationship, there's going to be a much more fruitful conversation than the donor talking to a total stranger, right? Just some consultant that, they've never met before. The conversation is going to be much more robust and transparent when there's already a relationship there, and the relationships benefit from having that conversation. So we think it's a much better path. People can be successful, perhaps, the other way, but we've also had a lot of demonstrated success through our model, which of course we prefer.
Yeah, and just one other question, Steve, before I ask Amy about this survey. Again, you are having success with this model. Kind of another way people look at it is a campaign consultant can be helpful because they're objective. They're not going to have rose-colored glasses. And by the way, everybody at the nonprofit already has a full-time job, and now we're adding a campaign on top of that. Again, how do you help the nonprofits that you work with see through some of those messages that we do here in the philanthropic sector?
Great question. So first of all, I actually can't think of a more important role for a nonprofit leader than talking to their biggest potential donors prior to a campaign. So we help them delegate, staff up to alleviate some of the room in their schedules. But the truth is that development directors, executive directors, CEOs, and board chairs should prioritize talking to donors prior to asking for a gift. We want them to build those relationships. That's their highest priority. So in terms of time, delegation, managing their plates and we work closely with organizations to do that. In terms of objectivity, we also work very closely with the nonprofit leaders. We're not saying go do your own interviews, good luck, do a feasibility study and come back and let us know how it is or how it goes. We are there with them every step of the way, coaching them to collect the right data and ask the right questions so that we're tracking the responses very carefully and aggregating data just like an outside consultant would. We're still playing that role. They're asking very specific questions so that we can incorporate as much objectivity into it as possible.
And one way to do that is with data. I love the phrase, facts don't have feelings. Data are just reporting what quantitatively is happening. And Stephen, Capital Campaign Pro has gathered some data on campaign feasibility studies. What have you found?
Yeah, well, speaking of feelings, capital campaigns tend to generate a lot of feelings for people, right? They make people nervous. It's a big deal. It can be, potentially millions of dollars with a lot of things at stake, a new building, program expansion. And when we talk to people, and I'm sure Amy can attest to this, people are nervous, right? And we wanted to be able to tell people beyond just case studies and anecdotes, which are good and are out there and people should look at them, but we were kind of missing that third pillar of data, right? Just hard empirical data that you can't really refute or argue with because it is hard data. So that's what we set out to do. We wanted to say, all right, let's ask as many people as we can that are in campaigns, that have recently completed campaigns. How did it go? Why'd you do it? What were the challenges? What were the benefits? So that we could present that data, good, bad, and ugly, and really give people a clear picture of what it's like to go through a campaign so that they can kind of compare themselves, set real expectations, but most importantly, have confidence. Because in our work, and I'm sure most capital campaign consultants would agree, campaigns are usually successful, but unless you have something beyond just case studies and anecdotes, it's met with skepticism. So that's the main reason that we set out to do this research. And it's our goal to update it every single year. In fact, we're gearing up to do it again this year because we want to have kind of a living, breathing, database of benchmarks and capital campaigns that anyone can look at any time to, give themselves confidence and just kind of something to compare themselves to.
Amy, when you saw the report, what findings really stood out for you?
Well, there were so many exciting findings. I would say the number one is that overall campaigns are successful. I think it was 96% of respondents reported that their campaign was successful. So a lot of people are concerned about going into campaigns because they're worried that their campaign won't succeed. So this data showed us that people who launch into campaigns do see success. I think there are three big ones that I would highlight and then refer people to the full study to see the others. But the second one is about annual fund. And the number one thing that we hear from nonprofit leaders is that they're concerned that a campaign is going to cannibalize or eat into their annual fund. And nearly 80% of respondents said that their annual fund either stayed the same or increased during and after their campaign. And so we feel that that's a pretty amazing number. We teach people that strategies and techniques to make sure that they're staying focused on their annual fund throughout the campaign, speaking with every donor about their annual fund gift and their campaign gift and why there's a reason for both. And those organizations that pay attention to it, we are confident will not see a dip in their annual fund and probably will even see an increase, especially towards the end or after their campaign. And that's what the data showed. So we're super excited by that number. The third thing that I'll highlight, maybe Stephen has others, is that small campaigns are generally equally as successful as big organizations, small nonprofits. So their goals tend to be smaller on average, but they're just as successful. They have the same success rates. So lots of, one-person development shops or smaller organizations are concerned that the big organizations have all the advantages, But the reality in the data tells us that small shops can do campaigns just as successfully as big organizations.
Those are great findings to have data to support. Many campaigns, most are successful. Most continue to see strength in their annual fund, and campaigns are for everybody, not just the big universities and the big hospital systems and the big arts organizations. But just as we teach at the fundraising school, regardless of your budget size, fundraising campaigns can be for you. Stephen, any other findings from the study beyond those that Amy highlighted for us?
Well, I always kind of like to compare how people in one question to how they answered another. And since we're talking about small shops, here's one we don't hear too often, right? It's small shops actually outperformed the rest of the cohorts, the large organizations, in a number of categories. And one that stands out to me is we asked everyone, besides the dollars raised, what were the big benefits to the campaign? And there was sort of a menu of options that they could choose from. And small shops reported that there was a higher rate of major donor relationship building than the rest of the field. So I think one of the reasons that happened is most of those small shops set with their first campaign. So it was probably, maybe one of the first times that they actually did engage with major donors, perhaps through a feasibility study or through some other way, because of the campaign. So the campaign can be a catalyst for small shops to really get to know their donors, especially their major donors, as well as make something big happen for the first time, right? These people were raising $3-4 million for the first time in their, organization's history, perhaps. So it was a really big confidence builder for those small shops, not only to do the campaign and be successful, but to see all those other benefits some of the large organizations didn't necessarily see. So we love small shops, and that was a cool thing to kind of sift through the data and recognize about them.
And yet again, another affirmation that fundraising campaigns can be for everybody when you design the campaign properly. I mean, one thing about these percentages, if our audience would allow me to use a sports metaphor, you might hear that a certain basketball team has a high percentage of hitting three-point shots, but they take some of the smallest number of three-point shots compared to their opponents, right? Because they take the right three-point shots and have a higher success possibility by waiting for that right shot. And so your campaign can be successful when you conduct that good feasibility study. If you have the courage to say no, if the feasibility study is flashing a yellow or a red light at the moment, or just hit pause. If you have that institutional readiness, you take those steps. These data are showing that you can have success. And Amy, where can folks see this entire study?
Yeah, if they visit the Capital Campaign Pro website, the URL is capitalcampaignpro.com/research, and they will see the latest research study. So I would love people to download the results and see the results for themselves.
And keep going back to compare from one year to the next as the study is updated. And again, these findings consistent with how we teach at the fundraising school. We have an entire 3-day course on fundraising campaigns. We used to call them capital campaigns, but people thought, well, if I'm not building a building or buying land, I guess I'm out. Oh, no. Campaigns are for everybody and don't just involve your property, and are accessible to nonprofits of all sizes. So we have our fundraising campaigns course, which is part of our certificate in fundraising management, which starts with principles and techniques of fundraising, which has a module on fundraising campaigns, part of our 24 public courses leading to 4 certificates. We can also bring the course directly to your nonprofit, your association, your region, whatever the course might be. Or we can take a little bit of this course, a little bit of that course, and knit something together through our custom training programs. Our training is available in person and online in the United States and anywhere across the world. We have our quarterly webinars, these free podcasts, and Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the 5th edition, our textbook, which gathers all of our teaching, including a chapter on fundraising campaigns. All of this on our website, philanthropy.iuneui.edu/the fundraising school. Again, I'm so grateful to our friend Jay Love for introducing us to Amy Eisenstein and Stephen Shattuck of the organization Capital Campaign Pro in a podcast from the Fundraising School brought to you by our producers, Jennifer Boffman and Mike Anthony. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. Now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.